Mm. Chapter 8, Cosmological Calamity. Hello. Daddy, if God made everything, who made God? My daughter, Christy, asked me this when she was 5 years old. Good question, I replied. Even a child sees the problem with the traditional cosmological argument. The old cosmological argument claimed that since everything has a cause, there must be a first cause, an unmoved first mover. Today, no theistic philosophers defend that primitive line because if everything needs a cause, so does God. The only way they can deal with my daughter's question is if they first get God off the hook. No, but you probably idealize Trump, which is stupid as fuck. Why would any of you people idolize another human being? But it's neither here nor there. One approach has been to claim that only effects need a cause. Since first cause is not an effect, it is exempt from causation. Another attempt conceives of a contingent cause of the universe, resting at the top of a pyramid of relationships rather than at the beginning of a chain of temporal events. But this a priori tactic of exempting the conclusion from the causality required of everything else, with no evidence that any special causeless or non-contingent objects actually exist, makes the creator a part of the definition of the premise, which is a circular reasoning. These versions fail to get God off the hook. Today, a more sophisticated version of the cosmological argument is being propounded that connects early Islamic theology with current Big Bang cosmology. According to the Kalam cosmological argument, a medieval Islamic argument dealing with the beginning and cause of the universe, infinity is just a concept. An actual infinity does not exist in reality. If the series of temporal events is infinite, we never could have traversed it to arrive at the current moment. Yet, we have reached this moment. Therefore, the series of events must have had a beginning. Today, cosmologists almost uniformly confirm that our observable universe began at the Big Bang, a singularity that brought into existence not only matter and energy, but time and space as well. Building on this, Christian philosophers such as William Lane Craig are promoting an up-to-date version of the cosmological argument that they think avoids the problem of earlier attempts. First premise, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist and therefore the universe has a cause. This may be seductive to those who already believe in a God. To me, it seems suspicious. The clause, everything that begins to exist, sounds artificial. It's not a phrase we hear outside the context of theistic philosophy. It appears to be an ad hoc construction designed to smooth over earlier apologetic efforts. The curious clause, everything that begins to exist, implies that reality can be divided into two sets, items that begin to exist and items that do not. In order for this cosmological argument to work, items that do not begin to exist cannot be empty. But more important, it must accommodate more than one item to avoid being simply a synonym for God. If God is the only object allowable in the non-beginning to exist category, then beginning to exist is merely a mask for the creator, and the premise everything that begins to exist has a cause is equivalent to everything except God has a cause. As with the earlier failures, this puts God into the definition of the premise of the argument that is supposed to prove God's existence, and in fact, we beg the question by doing so. What's going on, kitty cat? What's going on, Sir Bulijub? I don't know how you say that, this Sir. Where did theists obtain the idea in the first place that there is such a set as a not beginning to exist set? By what observations or arguments is the possibility of beginningless objects warranted? Certainly not via the cosmological argument, which simply assumes non-beginning to exist, and not from science, which observes nothing of the sort. If theists get their initial idea from a religious document or from inner experience, their argument may be more presuppositionalist than evidentialist. To say that not beginning to exist must accommodate more than one item is not to say that it must contain more than one item. The set might actually contain only one of the eligible candidates. The cosmological argument could be made successful if it could be shown not beginning to exist contains exactly one item from a plural set of possibilities, and if the winning candidate turns out to be a personal creator. The question of accommodation is not whether the set does not contain more or less than one item. It's whether it cannot contain other than one item. If it cannot, then the argument is circular. It would be like a dictator staging an election that permits no other candidates but himself. It's rigged from the start. Additionally, if the only candidate for NBE were God, then the second premise, the universe began to exist, would reduce to the universe is not God. If NBE is synonymous with God, the argument looks like this. Everything except God has a cause. The universe is not God, therefore the universe has a cause. Like, this is logical, if not very useful. The circular reasoning is revealed when theists build from this point. The above universe has a cause conclusion. Craig argues for a personal creator. We know that this first event must have been caused. The question is, how can a first event come to exist if the cause of that event exists changelessly and eternally? Why isn't the effect as co-eternal as the cause? It seems that there is only one way out of this dilemma, and that is to infer that the cause of the universe is a personal agent who chooses to create a universe in time. Philosophers call this type of causation agent causation, and because the agent is free, he can initiate new effects by freely bringing about conditions which were not previously present. This appeal to a personal creator depends on the premise that we know this first event must have been caused. However, as we have shown, if God is the only item allowed in the not beginning to exist category, the argument effectively, if not intentionally, begs the question. In order to avoid begging the question, theists must produce one or more real or hypothetical candidates other than God for the non-beginning to exist category. We have no experience of any non-beginning to exist objects in the natural universe. How could we? Nor can we propose anything hypothetical that does not begin to exist as a real item in the natural universe. We can't have such a thing within the natural universe if begin means begin in time, because time itself is a result of the Big Bang. No item in the natural universe transcends time, so it cannot not begin to exist. Assuming that current Big Bang cosmology is correct, it would be incoherent to say that something happened before time began. But perhaps there could be something outside the natural universe that would be accommodated by not beginning to exist besides God. Dr. Craig seems to allow this ontological possibility when he infers that the external cause of the universe is an agent causation, implying that it might be otherwise. Not beginning to exist might be open to an impersonal force as well as a personal force, or a number of impersonal forces. This would not necessarily lead to polytheism, deism, or violate the principle of economy. It might be true that only the personal agency actually exists from this set of possibilities. If theists, however, allow the theoretical possibility of an impersonal transcendent object in the not beginning to exist category, and it seems that they must allow this or some other non-theistic hypothesis, and if they have not convincingly eliminated it or them from the set of actual items in the not beginning to exist set, then they must remain open to the possibility that the origin of the universe could be explained in a purely naturalistic manner. Thanks, LJ. I appreciate that. Pastor Dean, you're just being a troll and not truly a pastor because, just throwing out comments that you know that I and most of my subscribers would disagree with isn't actually doing anything to win anyone over to your God. You're just being what do you call it? A pest? A jerk? You're just spamming. And I don't think that in any way reflects the edict given to you by Jesus Christ to love your neighbor. I'm gonna need you to do better, pastor. Transcendent does not equal supernatural. Have theists successfully eliminated all but one candidate for the NBE category? By what criteria have they concluded that an impersonal force cannot cause a universe? After all, experience within the universe shows that many impersonal causes create many natural effects. Craig appears to be justifying the hypothesis of a personal external force via the fact that the natural universe contains complex intelligence and free personal agency. Humans, for example. And a creator must be at least as complex as the thing it created. Otherwise, the creation would have been greater than the creator, which is impossible. But is it impossible? What exactly does greater mean? Flowing water created the Grand Canyon, which is greater. Loose pebbles started avalanches. We build machines that are greater than ourselves. Forklifts, jet airplanes. We create machines that think better than we do. Witness the defeat of world-class champion Garry Kasparov to IBM's Deep Blue. A man and a woman who are both of average intelligence can produce a child who is a genius. Nature abounds with examples of complexity arising from simplicity all the time. If this is true in the natural world, then why would it not be equally true in a transcendent or supernatural world if such a world exists? If we are allowed to draw an inference, as Craig does, from one world to the other, then we cannot rule out the possibility of the universe having arisen from simpler causes. There is no way to dismiss the option that impersonal forces created the right situation for the universe to arise. The principle holds in biology. The overwhelming consensus among biologists is that we evolved from simpler ancestors, and so did our ancestors. Theists who agree that the universe originated in a Big Bang about 15 billion years ago should not be uncomfortable with the observation that life evolved over that vast period of time. Those few theists who accept cosmology but reject biology may be picking their experts based on theology rather than science. If theists such as Craig think we can infer anything from natural observation about the characteristics of a transcendent creator, then we naturalists could be justified in playing the same game. We might infer that the creator, if it exists, evolved from a less complex non-personal source. Some theists dismiss biological evolution from simpler origins. Some discard or only macroevolution, and some only the evolution of DNA. But even if they're right, this wouldn't help them. Complex / simple does not necessarily translate to personal or impersonal. Who's to say that personality could not have arisen from an impersonal cause? The impersonal might be more complex. If this is possible, theists must explain why. Even if it's wrong, in spite of a wealth of evidence, that complexity arises from simplicity, in order for the cosmological argument to hold, theists must at least acknowledge the possibility of one or more transcendent forces that is not personal. They must ontologically contend with something else out there that is not God. They must define it and then eliminate it in order to avoid being accused of begging the question. Theists who get the point might mention that the something else, even if clearly defined, would be merely theoretical. True, but so is God, and if they had any evidence for God, they wouldn't need the cosmological argument at all. If an actual infinity cannot be part of reality, then God, if he is actually infinite, cannot exist. To get around this problem, some theists insist that God is not a part of actual reality. They regularly talk about a place beyond the universe, a transcendent realm where God exists outside of time. Craig rapturizes that the universe has a cause. This conclusion ought to stagger us, to fill us with awe, for it means that the universe was brought into existence by something which is greater than and beyond it. Of course, if you live outside of time, whatever that means, then you don't need a beginning in time. A transcendent being living beyond nature is conveniently exempt from the limitations of natural law, and all complaints that God must have had a cause or a designer using the same natural reason it tries to call for his existence can be dismissed by theists who insist that God is outside the loop, unaffected by natural causality and beyond time. Yet theists continue to describe this timeless being in temporal terms. Phrases such as God decided to create the universe are taken by us mere mortals to be analogous to such natural phrases as Annie Laurie decided to bake a pie. If such phrases are not equal or analogous to the normal human language, and if they are not redefined coherently, then they're useless. We may as well say God blob wobbled to scrumpwitch the universe. It doesn't make sense. The word create is a transitive verb. We have no experience of transitive verbs operating outside of time. How could we? So when we hear such a word, we must picture it only the way we can. A subject acts on an object. Considering the point at which an action is committed, there must be an antecedent state during which the action is not committed, and this would be true either in or out of time. To say that God created time is not comprehensible to us, but he did it anyway in spite of our lack of imagination, and then it couldn't have happened after the decision to commit it because there was no before. We might still, however, imagine the act of creation as following the decision to create, or to avoid temporal terms, the creating succeeds the deciding in the logical order. In logic, we say that a conclusion follows, though we do not mean this happens in space or time. It doesn't happen at all. Craig agrees that the origin of the universe is causally prior to the Big Bang, though not temporarily prior to the Big Bang, but doesn't seem to realize that causality requires temporality. Either in or out of time, the decision of a personal agency to commit an action happens antecedent to the action itself. Even if the deciding of the action happened simultaneously, it would still not be true that the acting was antecedent to the deciding. Imagine God saying, "Oh, look, I just created a universe. Now I'd better decide to do it." This means that a series of antecedent causal events must exist in the mind of a time-transcendent creator, if such a being exists. Since the Kalam argument claims that an actual infinity cannot exist in reality, it shoots itself in the foot. Although Kalam deals with temporal succession, the same logic applies to non-temporal antecedent events if such things are a part of reality. If the series were infinite, then God could never have traversed the totality of his own antecedent mental causes to arrive at his decision to say, "Let there be light." Therefore, sticking with Kalam, there must have been a first antecedent in the mind of an actual God, which means that God began to exist. This means began causally, but theists have conceded the appropriateness of expressing non-temporal actions in temporal language. If theists counter that the Kalam argument applies only to the impossibility of an actual mathematical infinity within the material universe, and that the transcendent, timeless domain of the creator is an entirely different kind of infinity that is not subject to the same laws, then they're begging the question again. Exempting the conclusion by definition from the premises by excluding the supernatural is circular reasoning. If it is true that an actual infinity cannot exist in reality, then a being that is actually infinite cannot be part of reality. In other words, the Kalam disproves the reality of a beingless God. If infinity is just a concept, as Kalam insists, then an infinite God is just a concept. If we take Kalam seriously, there's no escaping the fact that God had a beginning either in or out of time. Since this is true, the phrase "everything that begins to exist" includes God. Sticking with the cosmological argument, it follows that God has a cause. We are back to my kindergartner's question. By the way, I've never heard a coherent definition of what it means for a God to exist outside of time. This seems to be an equivocation, a hand-waving dodge on the issue. To exist means to occupy space and time. Things that exist are measurable. St. Augustine was philosophically and scientifically naive when he suggested that God exists outside of time. There is no way to be outside of time, as if there were an edge or border to it. Augustine and many modern Christians are still thinking like flat earthers. Time is a dimension, not a thing. Like all dimensions, it has no existence of its own, and it has no beginning, ending, or edge. If you want to measure something, say the height of the page of this book, you can start at one point, which you label 0, and then count the number of centimeters from that point to the other side along a dimension. It makes sense to say the page is so many centimeters tall, but what about the dimension itself? How long is the dimension? The 0 point has chosen arbitrarily along the dimension. Does it make sense to ask of the beginning of the dimension or the end? It does make sense to ask about the edge of the book, but where is the edge of the dimension? It is nowhere. Time is a dimension of space-time. Things that exist can be measured along that dimension. We can meaningfully talk about the beginning of the Civil War, but we cannot make any sense of the phrase beginning of time as if it were just a very long ruler. That would be like measuring the very concept of measuring, which is jumping up one logical sphere. We've read about the hypothetical ant crawling on the surface of a huge beach ball. Like flat earthers wondering where the edge of the world was, no matter what the ant does, no matter where it moves, it will never get to the end, to the edge. Every point on that surface is the same. So we might just say that every point is the beginning and every point is the end. The same is true with the dimensions of time. Every instant is now. Every point in time is the beginning and every point in time is the end. It is meaningless to ask, when did time start, or what happened before time started. In fact, scientists insist that the dimension of time is simply a byproduct of objects moving in space. Before there was matter, there was no before. If God is outside of time, then is time outside of God? If so, there is something else besides God in the cosmos. To say that God does not exist within space-time is to say that God does not exist. And even if it is true that God does exist outside of time, despite our failure to intuitively grasp what appears to be an impossibility, then how can he possibly interact with us mere temporals? It would be similar to an author trying to interact with one of the fictional characters in his or her novel. You just can't get there from here. At this point, the theist might remind us that we do have scientific knowledge of the beginning of the universe, but we have no such evidence regarding God. That is true, but it is self-incriminating. Yes, science is a material endeavor. It is impossible to probe the supernatural, whatever the fuck that is, with the tools of the natural world. But to say that we have no evidence that God had a beginning is to underscore the fact that we have no evidence about God at all. The Kalam argument was being propounded a millennium before scientists embraced the Big Bang, and its merits were then, as now, non-scientific. Another way to show that the Kalam argument may be mere wordplay is to identify the supernaturalistic assumption hidden in the second premise. Here's the argument again. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Notice how the words everything and universe are paired. In this syllogism, the two terms are considered to be of the same essence, at the same logical level. As an analogy, consider the following faulty arguments. All apples that fall from trees become bruised. The orange fell from a tree. Therefore, this orange is bruised. This argument is wrong because we're comparing apples and oranges. An orange is not a member of the set of apples. The universe, to philosophers, or the cosmos, to cosmologists, is the set of all things. A set is a collection of items. A set can be a member or a subset of another set, and it can be considered a subset of itself. But a set cannot meaningfully be a member of itself. Yet the cosmological argument treats the universe as if it were an item in its own set. The first premise refers to everything, and the second premise treats the universe as if it were a member of the set of things. But since a set should not be considered a member of itself, the cosmological argument is comparing apples and oranges. You can't draw an inference or law from the relationships between items in a set that applies to the set as a whole. The fact that each member of an orchestra plays in harmony with all other members of that orchestra does not mean that all orchestras play in harmony with each other. The fact that a distance of 2 separates each number in the set of even numbers from its immediate neighbor does not mean that the set of even numbers is separated from its neighbors by a distance of 2. Such thinking inaptly transfers a truth from one level to another. When you say that everything that begins to exist has a cause, you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps and say that the set of all these things, the universe, even if it did have a beginning of sorts, must follow the same rules or maintain the same relationships as the items that it contains. To illustrate, consider a faulty argument that uses the word began. Every nation began with a revolution. The alliance of all nations began 10 years ago. Therefore, there was a revolution 10 years ago. This is illogical because the alliance of all nations is not an individual nation, and the word began means something entirely different when it is applied to the set as a whole. Likewise, in the cosmological argument, the clause begins to exist should not mean the same thing when applied to the universe that it means when it applies to an individual things within the universe. Explaining the Kalam cosmological argument, Craig writes, the logic of the argument is valid and very simple. The argument has the same logical structure as the argument all men are mortals. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. So the question is, are there good reasons to believe that each of the steps is true? I think there are. But this isn't right. The all men are immortal argument does not have the same logical structure as the Kalam. Socrates is a man, but the universe is not a thing. The universe would have the same logical structure as the Kalam if it said all men are mortal. The human race is made up of men, therefore the human race is mortal. It is easy to spot the illogic when phrased in this manner. Bertrand Russell, in his 1948 debate with Frau Frederick Copleston, touched on the matter. I should say that the universe is just there, and it's all. I can illustrate what seems to me your fallacy. Every man who exists has a mother, and it seems to me your argument is that therefore the human race must have a mother, but obviously the human race hasn't a mother. That's a different logical sphere. What does everything mean? Standing alone, it is synonymous with the universe. But in the cosmological argument, everything does not refer to all things that exist because it is followed by the limiting clause that begins to exist. This implies, as we've seen, that there are some things that do not begin to exist that are not part of this particular set. Everything is understood in this context as 2 separate words, everything, referring to each individual item within beginning to exist. This is supported by the fact that begins to exist is singular, referring to one thing in the set beginning to exist. A thing is an object or system that is distinct in some manner from other objects or systems. Webster's New World Dictionary of the American Language defines thing as anything conceived of or referred to as existing as an individual, distinguishable entity. Specifically, A, any single entity distinguished from all others. The same dictionary also defines thing as an abstract concept, but we can assume that theists consider God and the universe to be real objects. A thing is something distinguishable, and to be distinguishable is to be limited. To say that I ate a strawberry is to say that what I ate was not a watermelon or a peach. To say that my daughter is redhead signifies that she is not a blonde or a brunette. To say that my friend is from New York means that he's not from Chicago, Paris, or any other city. In order to be considered a thing, an object must be a part of a larger context within which and by which it can be limited. The object must be able to be pulled away from other objects. Is the universe a thing? When the cosmological argument moves to its the universe began to exist, we're being forced to view the universe as a particular item in the set of things. But is the set of all things a thing itself? How is the set of all things distinguished from other things or other sets? In what context does the universe exist within which it can be identified as a distinct object? If we even suggest that the universe is a discrete thing, we are implying a realm above and beyond the universe within which it is contained, limited, and defined. This amounts to assuming transcendence. Theistic philosophers hope no one will notice that the language they are using effortlessly conjures the existence of a realm beyond nature, portraying the universe from a distance as if it had an environment. It is easy for non-theists who are not tempted to mix logical spheres to avoid such question begging. Copleston, responding to Russell, asked, "But are you going to say that we can't or we shouldn't even raise the question of the existence of the whole of this sorry scheme of things, of the whole universe?" "Yes," Russell replied. "I don't think there's any meaning in it at all. I think the word universe is a handy word in some connections, but I don't think it stands for anything that has a meaning." Today, cosmologists would substitute the word cosmos for universe, which is what Russell was talking about, the entirety of existence. What statements can we make about the universe that show us what it is not? The Grand Canyon is not in New Jersey. The Egyptian pyramids were not built in the 20th century, and baseballs are not made of jelly beans. What does the universe not exist? Of what is it not made? How does it differ from a non-universe? Such questions are meaningless when asked of the set of all things. In summary, in order for the Kalam cosmological argument to be salvaged, theists must answer these questions at least. Number one, is God the only object accommodated by the set of things that do not begin to exist? And if yes, then why is the cosmological argument not begging the question? If no, then what are the other candidates for the cause of the universe and how have they been eliminated? And number two, does the logic of Kalam apply only to temporal antecedents in the real world? If yes, this assumes the existence of non-temporal antecedents in the real world. So why is this not begging the question? And if no, then why doesn't the impossibility of an actual infinity disprove the existence of an actually infinite God? Chapter 9. Dear Theologian, I have a few questions and I thought you would be the right person to ask. It gets tough sometimes sitting up here in heaven with no one to talk to. I mean, really talk to. I can always converse with the angels, of course, but since they don't have free will and since I created every thought in their submissive minds, they're not very stimulating conversationalists. Of course, I can talk with my son Jesus and with the third person of our Holy Trinity, the Holy Spirit, but since we're all the same, there's nothing we can learn from each other. There are no well-placed repartees in the Godhead. We all know what the others know. We can't exactly play chess. Jesus sometimes calls me Father, and that feels good, but since he and I are the same age and have the same powers, it doesn't mean much. You are educated. You have examined philosophy and world religions. You have a degree that makes you qualified to carry on a discussion with someone at my level. Not that I can't talk with anyone, or even with the uneducated believers who fill the churches and flatter me with endless petitions, but you know how it is. Sometimes we all crave interaction with a respected colleague. You have read the scholars, you have written papers and published books about me, and you know me better than anyone else. It might surprise you to think that I have some questions. No, not rhetorical questions aimed at teaching spiritual lessons, but some real honest-to-God inquiries. This should not shock you because, after all, I created you in my image. Your inquisitiveness is an inheritance from me. You would say that love, for example, is a reflection of my nature within yourself, wouldn't you? Since questioning is healthy, it also comes from me. Somebody once said that we should improve all things and hold fast that which is good. My first question is this: where did I come from? As I sit up here in heaven and look around, I notice that there's nothing else here besides the objects that I have created and me. I don't see any other creatures competing with me, nor do I notice anything about me that might have created me, unless it is playing hide and seek. In any event, as far as I know, and I supposedly know everything, there's nothing else but me in three persons and my creations. I've always existed, you say. I didn't create myself, because if I did, then I would be greater than myself. So where did I come from? I know how you approach that question regarding your own existence, You notice that nature, especially the human mind, displays evidence of intricate design. You've never observed such design apart from a designer. You argue that human beings must have had a creator, and you'll find no disagreement from me. Then what about me? Like you, I observe that my mind is complex and intricate. It's much more complex than your mind, otherwise I couldn't create your mind. My personality displays evidence of organization and purpose. Sometimes I surprise myself at how wise I am. If you think your existence is evidence of a designer, then what do you think about my existence? Am I not wonderful? Do I not function in an orderly manner? My mind is not a random jumble of disconnected thoughts. It displays what you would call evidence of design. If you need a designer, then why don't I? You might think such a question is blasphemy, but to me, there is no such crime. I can ask any question I want, and I think is it a fair one. If you say that everything needs a designer, and then say that not everything, me, is a designer, aren't you contradicting yourself? By excluding me from the argument, aren't you bringing your conclusion into your argument? Isn't that circular reasoning? I'm not saying I disagree with your conclusion. How could I? I'm just wondering, why is it proper for you to infer a designer while it is not proper for me? If you're saying that I don't need to ask where I came from because I am perfect and omniscient while humans are fallible, then you don't need the design argument at all, do you? You've already assumed that I exist. You can make such an assumption, of course, and I would not deny you the freedom. Such an a priori and circular reasoning might be helpful or comforting to you, but it does me little good. It doesn't help me figure out where I come from. You say that I am eternally existent and that I might not object to that if I knew what it meant. It's hard for me to conceive of external existence. I just can't remember back that far. It would take me an eternity to remember back to eternity, leaving me no time to do anything else. So it's impossible for me to confirm I ever existed forever. And even if it is true, why is eternal greater than temporal? Is a long sermon greater than a short sermon? What does greater mean? Are fat people greater than thin people? Or old people greater than the young? You think it's important that I have always existed. I'll take your word for it for now. My question's not with the duration of my existence, but with the origin of my existence. I don't see how being eternal solves the problem. I still want to know where I come from. I can only imagine one possible answer, and I would appreciate your reaction. I know that I exist. I know that I could not have created myself. I also know that there is no higher God who could have created me. Since I can't look above myself, then perhaps I should look below myself for a creator. Perhaps this is speculative, so bear with me. Perhaps you created me. Don't be shocked. I mean to flatter you. Since I contain evidence of design, and since I see no other place where such design could originate, I'm forced to look for a designer, or designers, in nature itself. You're a part of nature. You are intelligent. That is what your readers say. Why should I not find the answer to my question in you? Help me out on this. Of course, if you made me, then I could not have made you. The reason that I think I made you is because you made me to think I made you. You have often said that a creator can put thoughts in your mind. Isn't it possible that you have put thoughts in my mind, and now here we are, both of us wondering where we came from? Some of you have said that the answer to this whole question is just a mystery that only God understands. Well, thanks a lot. The buck stops here. On the one hand, you use logic to try to prove my existence. On the other hand, when logic hits a dead end, you abandon it and invoke faith and mystery. These words might be useful to you as a placeholder for fact or truth, but they don't translate anything to me as anything meaningful. You can pretend that mystery signifies something terribly important, but to me it simply means you don't know. Some of you assert that I did not come from anywhere, that I just exist. I have also heard you say, however, that nothing comes from nothing. You can't have it both ways. I either exist or I don't. What was it that caused me to exist, as opposed to not existing at all? If I don't need a cause, then why do you? Since I'm not happy to say that this is a mystery, I must accept the only explanation that makes sense. You created me. Is that such a terrible idea? I know you think humans created many other gods like Zeus and Thor and Mercury and Elvis. You recognize that such deities originate in human desire, need, or fear. If the blessed beliefs of those billions of individuals can be dismissed as products of culture, then why can't yours? The Persians created Mithra, the Jews created Yahweh, and you created me. If I'm wrong about this, please straighten me out. My next question is this: what's it all about? Maybe I made myself, maybe some other god made me, or maybe you made me. Let's put that aside for now. I'm here. But why am I here? Many of you look up to me for purpose in life, and I have often said that your purpose in life is to please me. If your purpose is to please me, then what's my purpose? To please myself? Is that all there is to life? If I exist for my own pleasure, then that's just selfish. It makes it look like I created you merely to have some toys to play with. Isn't there some principle that I can look up to? Something to admire, adore, and worship? Am I consigned for eternity to sit here and amuse myself with the worship of others, or to worship myself? What's the point? I read your writings on the meanings of life, and they make sense in the theological context of human religious goals, even if they don't have much practicality in the real world. Many of you feel that your purpose in life is to achieve perfection, since you humans fall way short of perfection by your own admission, and I agree. Then self-improvement provides you with a quest. It gives you something to do. Someday you hope to be as perfect as you think I am, but since I am already perfect by definition, then I don't need such a purpose. I'm just sort of hanging out, I guess. Yes, I still wonder why I'm here. It feels good to exist, it feels great to be perfect, but it gives me nothing to do. I created a universe with all kinds of natural laws that govern everything from quarks to galactic clusters, and it runs okay on its own. I had to make these laws, otherwise I would be involved in a lot of repetitive busy work, such as pulling light rays through space, yanking falling objects down to Earth, stacking items together to build molecules, and a trillion other boring tasks, more worthy of a slave than a master. You have discovered most of those laws and might be on the verge of putting the whole picture together. Once you've done that, you will know what I know, that there is nothing in the universe for me to do. It's boring up here. I mean, I could create more universes and more laws, but what's the point? I've already done universes. Creation is like sneezing or writing short stories. It just comes out of me. I could go on an orgy of creation, just create, create, create. After a while, a person can get sick of the same thing, you know, like when you eat a whole box of chocolates and discover that the last piece doesn't taste as good as the first piece. Once you've had 10 children, do you really need 20? I mean, if more is better, then I'm obligated to continue until I have fathered an infinite number of children in an endless number of universes. If I must compel myself, then I am a slave. Many of you assert that it is inappropriate to seek purpose within yourself, that it must come from outside. Well, all right, I feel the same way. I can't merely assign purpose to myself. If I did, then I would have to look for my own reasons. I would have to come up with an account of why I chose one purpose over another. And if such reasons came from within myself, I'd be caught in a loop of self-justified rationalizations. Since I have no power of my own, then I have no purpose. Nothing to live for. It's all meaningless. Sure, I can bestow meaning on you, pleasing me and achieving perfection or whatever, and perhaps that's all that concerns you. But doesn't it bother you just a little that the source of meaning for your life has no source of its own? And if this is true, then isn't it also true that ultimately you have no meaning for yourself either? If it makes you happy to demand an external reference point on which to hang your meaningfulness, why would you deny the same to me? I also want to be happy, and I also want to find that happiness is something other than myself. Is that a sin? On the other hand, if you think I have the right and the freedom to find happiness in myself and in the things I created, then you should not have the right. I mean, you, whom I created in my image. I know that some of you have proposed a solution to this problem. You call it love. You think I'm lonely up here and that I created humans to satisfy my longing for a relationship with something that is not myself. Of course, this will never work because it's impossible for me to create something that is not part of myself. But let's say that I try anyway. Let's say that I create this mechanism called free will, which imparts to humans a choice. If I give you the freedom, though this is stretching the word because there's nothing outside of my power, not to love me, then if some of you, a few of you, even one of you chose to love me, I have gained something I might not have had. I have gained a relationship with someone who could have chosen otherwise. This is called love, you say. This is a great idea on paper. In real life, however, it turns out that billions of people have chosen not to love me, and I have to do something with these infidels. I can't just uncreate them. If I simply destroy all the unbelievers, I may as well have created only believers in the first place. Since I am omniscient, I would know in advance which of my creations would have a tendency to choose me. This would produce no conflict with free will, since those who would not have chosen me would have been eliminated simply by not having been created in the first place. This seems much more compassionate than the hell concept. You can't have a love relationship with someone who is not your equal. If you humans don't have a guaranteed eternal soul like me, then you are worthless as companions. If I can't respect your right to exist independently and your right to choose something other than me, then I couldn't love those of you who do choose me. I would have to find a place for all those billions of eternal souls who reject me, whatever their reasons might be. Let's call it hell, a place that is not God, not me. I would have to create this inferno, otherwise neither the unbelievers nor I could escape each other. Let's ignore the technicalities of how I would manage to create hell and then separate it from myself, apart from whom nothing else exists. It's not as though I could create something and then simply throw it away. There is no cosmic trash heap. The point is that since I am supposedly perfect, this place of exile must be something that is the opposite. It must be ultimate evil, pain, darkness, and torment. If I created hell, then I don't like myself. And if I did create a hell, then it certainly would not be smart to advertise that fact. How would I know if people were claiming to love me for my own sake or simply to avoid punishment? How can I expect someone to love me who is afraid of me? The threat of eternal punishment might scare some people into obedience, but it does nothing to inspire love. If you treated me with threats and intimidation, I would have to reconsider my admiration for your character. How would you feel if you had brought some children into the world knowing that they were going to be tormented eternally in a place you built for them? Could you live with yourself? Wouldn't it have been better not to have brought them into the world in the first place? I know that some of you feel that hell is just a metaphor. Do you feel the same way about heaven? I mean, anyway, this whole love argument is strong. Since I'm perfect, I don't lack anything. I can't be lonely. I don't need to be loved. I don't even want to be loved because to want is to lack. To submit to giving and receiving love is to admit that I can be hurt by those who choose not to love me. If you can hurt me, I am not perfect. If I can't be hurt, I can't love. If I ignore or erase those who do not love me, sending them off to hell or oblivion or wherever, then my love is not sincere. If all I'm doing is throwing the dice of free will and simply reaping the harvest of those who choose to love me, then I am a selfish monster. If you played such games with people's lives, I would call you insensitive, conceited, insecure, selfish, and manipulative. I know you tried to get me off the hook. You explain that yours truly is not responsible for the suffering of unbelievers because rejection of God is their choice, not mine. They had a corrupt human nature, you explain. Well, who gave them their human nature? If certain humans decide to do wrong, where do they get that impulse? If you think it came from Satan, who created Satan? And why would some humans be susceptible to Satan in the first place? Who created that susceptibility? If Satan was created perfect and fell, where did he fall from? I mean, if I'm perfect, then how in God's name did I end up creating something that would not choose perfection? Someone once said that a good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit. Here's the title for your next theological tome. Was Eve perfect? If she was, she would not have taken the fruit. If she wasn't, I created imperfection. Maybe you think of all this gives me a purpose, putting Humpty Dumpty back together, but it actually gives me a headache. If you won't permit me a simple headache, then how can you allow me the pain of lost love? I cannot live with myself if I thought my actions were causing harm to others. Well, I shouldn't say that. Since I think you created me, I suppose I should let you tell me what I could live with. If you think it's inconsistent, or if you think it's consistent with my character to tolerate love and vengeance concurrently, then I have no choice. If you're my creator, and I could spout tenderless out of one side of my mouth and brutality out of the other. I could dance with my lover on the bones of my errant children and pretend to enjoy it. I'd be very human indeed. I have 1,000 questions, but I'll ask you just 2 more. How do I decide what's right and wrong? I don't know how I got here, but I'm here. Let's just say that my purpose is to make good people out of my creations. Let's say that I'm here to help you learn how to be perfect like me, and that's the best way to achieve. That is for you to act like me, or act like I want you to act. Your goal is to become a mirror of me. Won't that be splendid? I'll give you rules and principles, and you'll try to follow them. This may or may not be meaningful, but it'll keep you both busy. It'll keep you and me both busy. I suppose that from your point of view, this would be terribly meaningful, since you think I have the power to reward and punish. I know some of you Protestant theologians think that I give rewards, not for good deeds, but simply for believing in my son Jesus, who paid the punishment for your bad deeds. Well, Jesus spent only about 36 hours of an eternal life sentence in hell and is now back here in ultimate coziness with me. Talk about a wrist slap. He was not paroled for good behavior. He was simply released. If my righteous judgment demanded absolute satisfaction, then Jesus should have paid the price in full, don't you think? Beyond that, it's entirely incomprehensible to me why you think I would accept the blood of one individual for the crime of another. How's that fair? How's that justice? If you commit a felony, does the law allow your brother to serve the jail sentence for you? If someone burglarized your home, would you think justice was served if a friend of the burglar bought you new furniture? Do you really think that I am such a bloodthirsty dictator that I will be content with the death of anyone for the crime of another? And are you so disrespectful of justice that you would happily accept a stand-in for your crimes? What about personal responsibility? Should I welcome believers into heaven who have avoided the rap for their own actions? Something is way out of kilter here. But let's ignore these objections. Let's assume Jesus and I worked it all out and that evil will be punished and good rewarded. How do I know the difference? You're insisting that I not consult any rule book. You're asking me to be the final authority. I must simply decide, and you must trust my decision. Am I free to decide whatever I want? Suppose I decide that I would like you to honor me with a day of my own. I like the number 7. I don't know why, because it's the first useless number. You never see any sing any hymns to me in 7/4 time. Let's divide the calendar into groups of 7 days and call them a week. For harmony, I'll divide each lunar phase into roughly 7 days. The last day of the week or maybe the first day, I don't care. I'll set aside for myself. Let's call it the Sabbath. This all feels good, so I suppose it's the right thing to do. I'll make a law ordering you to observe the Sabbath. And if you do it, then I'll pronounce you good people. In fact, I'll make it one of my 10 commandments, and I'll order your execution if you disobey it. This all makes perfect sense, though I don't know why. Help me out here. How am I supposed to choose what's moral? Since I can't consult any authority, the thing to do, it appears, is to pick randomly. Actions will become right or wrong simply because I declare them to be so. If I whimsically say that you should not make any graven or molten images of anything that is in the heaven above or that is in the earth beneath or that is in the water underneath the earth, then that's that. If I decide murder is right and compassion is wrong, you just have to accept it. Is that all there is to it? I just decide willy-nilly what's right and what's wrong. Or worse, I decide based on whatever makes me feel good. I've read in some of your literature that you denounce such self-centered attitudes. Some of you say that since I'm perfect, I can't make any mistakes. Whatever I choose to do must be right or wrong. Whatever I choose to be, right or wrong, will be in accordance with my nature. And since I am perfect, then my choices will be perfect. In any event, my choices will certainly be better than your choices, so you say. But what does perfect mean? If my nature is perfect, then I'm living up to a standard. If I'm living up to a standard, then I am not God. If perfection means something all by itself, apart from me, then I am constrained to follow its path. If, on the other hand, perfection is defined simply as conformity to my nature, then it doesn't mean anything. My nature can be whatever it wants, and perfection will be defined accordingly. See the problem here? If perfection equals God, then it's just a synonym for me, and we can do away with that word. Actually, we can do away with either word. Take your pick. If I'm perfect, then there are certain things that I cannot do. I am not free to feel envy, lust, malice, for example. Then I'm not omnipotent. I cannot be more powerful than you if you can feel things that I can't feel. Additionally, if you feel that God is perfect by nature, what does nature mean? The word is used to describe the way things are or act in nature. And since you think I am above nature, you must mean something else. Something like character or attributes. To have a nature or a character means to be one way and not another. It means that there are limits. Why am I one way and not another? How did I get decided that my nature will be what it is? If my nature is clearly defined, then I am limited. I am not God. If my nature has no limits, as some of you suggest, then I have no nature at all. And to say that God has such and such a nature is meaningless. In fact, if I have no limits, then I have no identity. If I have no identity, then I do not exist. Who am I? This brings me back to the conundrum. If I don't know who I am, then how can I decide what is right? Do I just poke around in myself until I come up with something? There is one course I could pursue, and some of you have suggested this for yourselves. I could base my pronouncements on what is best for you humans. You people have physical bodies that bump around in a physical world. I could determine those actions that are healthy and beneficial for material beings in a material environment. I could make morality something material, something that is relative to human life, not to my whims. I could declare, by conclusion, not by edict, that harming human life is bad, and that helping or enhancing human life is good. This would be like providing an operation manual for something I designed and manufactured. It would require me to know all about human nature and the environment in which humans live, and to communicate these ideas to you. This makes a lot of sense, but it changes my task from one of determining morality to one of communicating morality. If morality is discovered in nature, then you don't need me, except maybe to prod you along. I saw to it that you have capable minds with the ability to reason and do science. There's nothing mysterious about studying how humans interact with nature and with each other. And you should be able to come up with your own set of rules. Some of you tried this millennia before Moses. Even if your rules contradict mine, I couldn't claim any higher authority than you. And you'll be able to give reasons for your rules, which I can only do by submitting to science myself. If morality is defined by how human beings exist in nature, then you don't need me at all. I'm off the hook. From what I've read, most of you have your feet on the ground with no help from me. I could hand down some stone tablets containing what I think is right and wrong, but it would still be up to you to see if my rules work in the real world. I think we all agree that grounded reason is better than the whim of an ungrounded deity. This is a wonderful approach, but what bothers me is that while this may help you know what is moral in your environment, it doesn't help me much. I don't have an environment. I'm out here flapping in the breeze. I envy you. Nor does the humanistic approach help those of you who want morality to be rooted in something absolute outside of yourselves. It must be frightening for you fucking snowflakes who need an anchor to realize that there's no bottom to the ocean. Well, it's frightening for me also. I don't have an anchor of my own. That's why I'm asking for your help. Thank you for reading my letter and for letting me impose on your busy schedule. Please answer at your convenience. I have all the time in the world. Sincerely yours truly, God. Part 3. What's wrong with Christianity? Chapter 10. The Bible and Morality. Fucking hell. Look at those beauties. Fucking beauties. What are you looking at? I mean, it is, but not fast enough. It'll get there. I hope so. Oh shit. You already know. Nice ashtray. Thanks. Boogie Chan and he beat. Boogie beat. Damn, was I don't even know I'm looking. I don't even know. Turn this light on. The Bible and morality. Believers in God do not have a corner on the morality market. During all my years of preaching, I simply assumed that the Bible was the rock-solid foundation of morality, and it never crossed my mind to examine that assumption. Yet, as I morphed from faith to reason, I started looking at the Word of God in a different light. In the next chapter, I lay out a natural basis for morality, how to be good without God, and show how we non-believers actually have a better grasp of ethics than those who take the Bible seriously. But first, I need to shine the light on why I no longer consider the Bible to be a good book. The word moral appears nowhere in the Bible. Neither does morality, ethics, or ethical. To inquire if the Bible is a good moral guide is to ask a question that originates outside the Bible. This doesn't mean that the Bible has nothing to say about behavior. The phrase, to do right, appears throughout Scripture, but this is usually followed by, in the sight of the Lord. To do right in one's own eyes is considered evil. There are a few passages that talk about doing that which is right or good without an explicit connection to deity, but taken in the general context of biblical theology, all behavior that Christians and Jews consider to be good is measured against the righteousness of God, not against moral or ethical principles of humanity. Proverbs 16:25 says, "There is a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death." Ironically, the first place the phrase "do right" is used in the Bible is when Abraham questioned the morality of God. Abraham argued with God and succeeded in getting him to change his mind about slaughtering innocent victims in Sodom. "That be far from thee to do after this manner, to slay the righteous with the wicked, and that the righteous should be as the wicked. That be far from thee, shall not be judge of all the earth do right." God did change his mind about the minimum number of good people required to prevent the slaughter, but he went ahead and murdered all the inhabitants of Sodom anyway, including all of the unrighteous children, babies, and fetuses. It appears that Abraham was more moral than his God, a matter to be examined later. And this question is quite valid. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? When a parent who smokes tells a child not to smoke, the child can be forgiven for asking, well, what about you? If the basis for morality rests with a single entity, then what makes that entity accountable? What makes God moral? True Christians should not ask if the Bible is moral or if God is moral. If God is the source of morality, then asking if God is moral is like asking if goodness is good. To ask seriously if God or the Bible is moral is to assume that moral means something apart from God, and that we already know what it means independently of the Bible. If the word moral has meaning by itself, then right and wrong can be understood apart from God, and judging the morality of God puts him under the jurisdiction of a higher level of criticism. This is true even if the judgment is favorable. To the believer, questioning the morality of God is blasphemy. It implies that the supreme judge can be judged. But of course, is God moral is a perfectly legitimate question. Not only does it make sense to free thinkers who are outside the religious circle and therefore are not required to reduce it to a simple ontological tautology describing the perfection of deity, but it has to make some kind of sense to Christians, if they're honest, in order for them to be able to worship. Can you worship someone who has not entered respect, who has not earned respect? When Christians or Jews say that God is good, aren't they judging God? Don't they think his character merits praise and adoration, or are they simply giving blind obedience to whatever happens to be omnipotence? Most of us do not consider it an admirable moral quality to praise power alone. So if believers deem God to be good, then it must be because they have judged God to be morally worthy of respect. You can't praise what you don't admire. The question turns out to be something of a trap for believers. If pressed, they will have to back off from judging God, and will have to admit that God is moral by definition alone. It doesn't really matter how God acts. God is good because God said he is good, and we should worship him not because he has earned our admiration, but because he has demanded it. Morality is not a question with which mere human minds should wrestle, believers insist. It is something that should be determined by the perfect, omniscient, omnipotent mind of God. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the revealed religions that directly or indirectly share the Jewish law, pretend to find their answer in morality in a holy book that originates from a mind that exists outside the material world. Their way to be moral is simply stated, obey Scripture. Regardless of whether humanism or other naturalistic ethical systems are successful or even possible, and regardless of whether we truly need an external moral code, the question can still be raised about the adequacy of any particular religious solution. Is the Bible a good book? Is the Bible an acceptable guide for moral behavior? The Bible is indeed filled with very specific commandments for living. Let's look at them. The fourth commandment says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. This is one of the Big Ten, so it can't be ignored. At face value, it seems straightforward enough. But what exactly does it mean? How do you, quote unquote, remember the Sabbath? And what happens if you fail? In the book of Numbers, the Lord gives a specific example of how the Sabbath law is applied. But he first explains that there's a difference between sinning deliberately and sinning accidentally, comparable to the modern day era of intent. Although this provides for varying degrees of sentencing, it does not mitigate the crime itself. A sin is still a sin. And if any soul sin through ignorance, then he shall bring a she-goat of the first year for a sin offering. But the soul that doeth aught sin presumptuously, whether he be born in a land or a stranger, the same reproacheth the Lord. And that sow shall he cut off from among his people, because he hath despised the word of the Lord and hath broken his commandment. That soul shall utterly be cut off. His iniquity shall be upon him. Strong language. There's accidental sin and there's deliberate sin, though it seems that the former should hardly count as a sin. In any event, the passage that immediately follows this clarification shows that what happens to a person who deliberately breaks the Sabbath law. And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day. And they that found him brought him unto Moses and Aaron, and unto all the congregation. And they put him in ward, because it was not declared that should be done what should be done to him. And the Lord said unto Moses, the man shall be surely put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones without the camp. And all the congregation brought him without the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died as the Lord commanded Moses. This is clear. Don't pick up sticks on Saturday. If you pick up sticks, God's followers will pick up stones. Is this a good guide for morality? When I was a child, each year my family would spend weeks camping in the mountains of California. My brothers and I had the job of picking up kindling wood for the fire. This often happened on the weekend. Didn't my born-again parents read the Bible? Perhaps my sin was one of ignorance. Where am I going to find a she-goat? The man who was stoned to death was likely gathering firewood to cook for food for his family. He was the one acting morally. Some believers assert that these primitive Old Testament laws are no longer relevant and have been superseded by Jesus. But that proves the point. If they use such an argument, they are admitting that at least part of the Bible is not acceptable for today's society. How many of us stop and think what day of the week it is before we pick up sticks? However you interpret it, the 15th chapter of Numbers is still in the Bible. The Sabbath law is still in the Ten Commandments, and we see no condemnation of such barbarism, no moral outcry, no denunciation by Christians of these shameful acts committed by their loving God in the good book. We see no pages being torn out of Bibles with disgust. What if an Ayatollah were to command the execution of a person who picked up sticks on an Islamic holy day because it offended Allah? What will we think of such bloodthirsty, immoral arrogance? In dealing with such troublesome scriptural issues as capital punishment for picking up sticks on a Saturday, or Sunday, according to the Christian Sabbath, some liberal Christians will agree that portions of the Bible are now omitted. Outmoded. The text should not be taken literally, they claim. We should seek instead the spiritual lesson that underlies the specific example. That would be like saying, I'm going to teach you a lesson about obedience by telling you that I killed someone. Don't worry about the violence or that person's life, because I love you. I want you to learn how righteous I am. There is a subset of fundamentalists called dispensationalists who claim that the Old Testament rules were in effect only for that period of history, and that now we have different rules because God's plan is unfolding in stages, or dispensations. Although Jesus said he came to uphold every jot and tittle of the Old Testament law, other evangelical Christians will assert that tougher measures were required during the struggling infancy of the besieged Israelite nation. God's people were chosen at war, so some moral rationing was justified. But that now Christianity is on the scene, such measures are no longer needed, though they still preach that the world is more corrupt than ever and that the forces of evil continue to attack believers. All of these liberal arguments, at minimum, admit that there are at least some parts of the current Bible that are now no longer relevant to proper human behavior. All of us, believers and non-believers alike, whatever our reasoning, have to agree that the Bible can be downright brutal. Apologize, theologize, demythologize, liberalize, and rationalize all you want. Those barbaric scriptures are still being sold in bookstores. Many courts use the Bible as the standard of truth-telling, and U.S. presidents place their hand upon it during inauguration, a practice incidentally not mandated by the Constitution. But any version of a holy book that contains barbaric decrees cannot be entirely palatable to the modern world. Perhaps it could be argued that some parts are still relevant, but the Bible as a whole is undeniably flawed. Believers often accuse skeptics of ignoring the good while picking out only the bad parts of the Bible. Believers ask why we don't join them in emphasizing that which is good and beautiful in the Bible. This might appear to be a fair question until it's turned around and we ask them, why don't you join us in denouncing the ugly parts? Then they don't see the question as being quite so fair. Suppose you invited me to your house to see your beautiful garden. Here, look at this beautiful iris, you might say. I might nod my head and smile. Yes, that's beautiful. I've seen better, but that's not bad. And over here, look at this gorgeous rose. Wow, this is pretty, I might agree. But as I look around the garden, I see that it is overrun with weeds and trash. Some of the plants show obvious signs of disease and decay, and bugs are chewing many of the leaves. Noticing my distraction, you might say, oh, just ignore that. I want you to see the good parts. But you invited me to here to see your beautiful garden, and I have to say I am disappointed. You do have some nice flowers, which actually stand out against the ugliness around them, but the general impression is chaotic and hideous. Well, but you're not looking at it the right way. You have to ignore all that. Those things you're choosing to stare at don't bother me. Adjust your focus. Don't concentrate on the bad. Look for the good. The disease isn't my fault, man. Someone else threw all the trash in there. The original garden was perfect. Who's to say what even is a weed? I can't pull out the weeds because then there'd be no contrast and we wouldn't appreciate how beautiful flowers are. Yeah, a few flowers are nice, but on balance, this is an ugly sight. You're not a good gardener. I thought you were my friend. Oh, well, what are friends for? Those who can look at the Bible objectively are not handicapped with the requirement that it be worshipped or respected. Notice that there are problems with using it as a guide for behavior. Number one, the Bible argues from authority, not from reason, claiming that might makes right. Number two, the Bible nowhere states that every human being possesses an inherent right to be treated with respect and fairness. Humans don't matter as much as God does. Three, the biblical role models, especially Yahweh, Elohim, and Jesus, are very poor moral examples, often ignoring their own good teachings and ruthlessly pursuing their own tyrannical teachings. And number four, many moral precepts of the Bible are just plain bad, even dangerous. Number five, on closer inspection, the few positive teachings are uninspired, unoriginal, inadequate, and irrelevant. On balance, this is an ugly garden. And Arthur Ruth Green calls the Bible a moral grab bag. Many picks and chooses from its pages. Most ignore it, and those who do use it as a guide for behavior do not do so for religious rather than moral reasons. Those believers who are good people, and I think most of them are, and who credit the Bible for their standards are giving credit where credit is not due. Christians, it turns out, don't have a corner on morality. On average, they are no more moral than unbelievers. Some might argue that they are less moral. Those few shining examples from the Christian community shine no brighter than the caring unbelievers. But for all their talk about the need for moral guidance, it cannot substantiate the claim that the Bible is a good guide for modern behavior. No, they can't. They sure as shit can't, brother. Sure as shit can't, brother.